Okay, this lecture is a short one just to kind of review the material on these two figures, Plato and Aristotle. So, Plato is a student of Socrates, and most of what Plato wrote were dialogues featuring Socrates as a protagonist, and he founded the Academy. And Aristotle was Plato's student and was also the tutor to Alexander the Great. So you can kind of see a trajectory within Greek history from Socrates to Alexander through these two figures. So let's go over them. So Plato um, is considered one of the great philosophers of all human history. He, as I mentioned, was Socrates' student, and there's enough Socrates in Plato that we can kind of guess that there's a huge influence upon Plato and his kind of style. Where Socrates, at least from what we know, there's nothing written down. Plato wrote down these dialogues, and the dialogues are meant to basically learn philosophy in the style of dialectic. Because Plato, let's put it this way: Plato is not interested in human experience. He's not interested in trusting your senses. In fact, he's of the school that the reality that we sense it can't be trusted. These are shadows. These shadows on the wall. To use the analogy of the cave, they are it's in flux. To quote the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus. So um, that moves Plato to pose that there is this transcendent realm where truth is found, and that this is what he calls a world of forms. And in the world of forms, universal ideas of everything that we see down in our sensible world um, exist as copies of these universal ideas that are transcendent. So philosophy is in a lot of ways trying to, through dialogue, through reason, trying to um, push past the reality or the perceived reality that we sense. Philosophy is trying to get through that to the real, the transcendent real. Um, and so a classic way of understanding this is like when Plato would say you look at that chair and you're like, okay, yeah, that's the example of a chair. And he would say, is that the ideal chair? And in fact, would point out four or five different chairs that we'd all agree on were chairs, but they're all different. There's some kind of difference among them. So the idea here is that there had to be some kind of like universal, transcendent idea of chairness um, that we've inherited once we were born into the world. Now, there's a lot about the fact of Plato believed in immortality of the soul, and that in a lot of ways transmigration of souls. So like one of the reasons he's trying to recollect knowledge is the fact that he thinks that our souls once existed in this transcendent world. So where does this all get us in the realm of like politics? So Plato, in fact, was not a great lover of democracy. In fact, he thought this is what killed his great teacher Socrates. And so, what he proposed instead is, in some ways, an authoritarian government where a philosopher king of sorts rules over the city. And in fact, later on in his really later works, he would even propose a theocracy. Um, his understanding of God is not as thought out as like a Judeo-Christian conception, which is not so far away from this time period. but it does seem to be a certain sense of authoritarianism and a theocracy based on Plato's concept of the good, which is what he's trying to use his philosophy to seek. So, in a nutshell, Plato is a student of Socrates. He writes in dialogues. It's through dialectic that one can come to the truth, and truth comes, in transcending into this world of forms, this ideal world. All right, and here's just a sample of what Plato's cave looks like. You can, I'd like you to read that part from the module, and you can refer back to that. All right, let's talk about Aristotle then. Aristotle is, in some ways, as the painting by the Renaissance uh, painter Raphael illustrates, Aristotle is interested in this world. He, in fact, is very foundational for so many fields of disciplines, including science. Now, Aristotle, who is going to be the founder of the Lyceum, Aristotle believed that the world was worth a sensible world was worth our study. In fact, he believed that you can find the universal in the particulars of uh, of our sensible world. And so he is much more of kind of a classic, a Renaissance man, where he's basically studying everything. So most of his writings are also lecture notes. So if you think about like a part where Aristotle and Plato mm, um, are different, is that Plato is writing in these make believe dialogues featuring mostly Socrates, whereas Aristotle is using a lecture style of reason and rationality and argumentation and science and in some ways history to argue his points. Um, he did believe the human beings are separate from other creatures. This is based on their rationality. He did have a hierarchy of being. In fact, women and what he would call slaves were on the lower part of this hierarchy. He was pretty clear about that. Um, and kind of like his focus, if you read a lot of Aristotle, trying to get like a what's the main idea that a theme that you can see in Aristotle's writings. I'd say one of it is that Aristotle, if he's paying attention to the sensible world, he is looking at the process of development and decay, um, and where that freaked Plato out, and so Plato's looking for like this transcendent stability. Aristotle is just saying like this is, if you look at the world, you look at human beings, they're in a process of becoming, and that each part of nature has a telos, an aim. So there's a natural process to things, and it's up to the philosopher to understand and study the process. And so Aristotle, even though he's training Alexander the Great at one point, when he comes to politics, he actually is studying it like you and I would today. You look at the different types, you judge their context, and in general, he kind of like senses like, well, this one has its pluses and minuses, and this one has its pluses and minuses. So he's trying to look for kind of a law of average between different, types of government, different social structures. Moreover, he, unlike Plato, who wanted to ban the plays, Aristotle is very much like us. I would assume he'd be binge watching, shows. He's actually interested in a way that we actually get catharsis from, watching tragedy and watching comedy and stuff like that. And he thought about what it does to us as the viewers. Now, his idea of God, all his philosophy, but specifically his idea of God, will be very big in creating the foundation of medieval Christian and Islamic and Jewish theology and philosophy. So he has a huge imprint, again, across all the disciplines, but particularly, as you'll see later, is extremely important in getting medieval thinkers to kind of think outside the box. Now, his concept of God is of God being the unmoved mover or the highest cause of being. And again, if you're thinking a process of like, how did we all get here? For Aristotle, it's almost like this God is kind of the starting point, but God is not, and this becomes a problem for the medievals. God is not a personal God. God is basically pure thinking. Um, and so there is this is something they have to like work, and what it does is lay down the framework of medieval thinkers dealing with Aristotle saying one thing and their um, scriptural revelation saying another. So they actually start to utilize their rationality to argue, like, hey, I can agree with Aristotle on these fine points, but when it comes to this, we think he's a little off, and here's why. So this is why Aristotle is important. So both figures, Plato and Aristotle, will play a major role throughout history of thought. Um, they will continue to challenge the world today, and you can see roots of both thinkers in contemporary philosophy even today.